At the end, I know a lot of questions, people may have questions for Jim Regenbaugh, but we'll kind of save those to the end too, depending on our time. I think first off, we'll start off with Neil Meeks, VML.
Thank you, Dean. 2,500 years ago, and I have hair on my head, a Greek physician decided, named Hippocrates, decided that what was needed was a personal oath for physicians. So he went to whatever was the Staples or Office Max and got the appropriate writing medium for those days and comprised a series of principles that have endured to this day. Now, most of us in this room are not doctors, but many of us know at least one of those dictums, and that is to do no harm. And I know that when you met with your delegates and your senators before the session, and you explained to them the situation of your local revenues, and you said to them, please do no harm. And when you talked to them about state aid for public education, you said to them, look, we know that you can't afford to restore that $1.1 billion that you pulled out of education since fiscal year 2008, or that you have the money to increase the state's share for the true cost of education, but please do no harm. And when you talked about public safety, such as the 599 program, or jail operations, or sheriff's departments, you said, I know that you can't make up for all the cuts that you did to us, but please do no harm. And when you talked about the safety net for those Virginians in record numbers who are depending on it to live and to exist, and the fact that you have to spend so much money to administer Comprehensive Services Act or all the other income eligibility programs, you said, please do no harm. And now we get to tax authority. And I know that you said to them, you know, we're not going to ask you to expand local tax authority. We're not going to ask you to modernize local taxes so that they're less dependent on property taxes, which account for 53% of local generated revenue. That, you know, you understood that, you know, it would probably be very difficult for them to try to modernize local taxation so that it actually works in a 21st century economy. But please, do no harm. And I'm sure they all nodded their heads and off they went. And here's what's happened. On the House floor today is House Bill 512. That's the machinery and tools tax. This is a miraculous bill which can only occur in Capitol Square over there, in which a new piece of equipment, which you can see, which you can touch, which you can feel, all of a sudden becomes not tangible any longer, but invisible and intangible, and disappears from the local tax rolls for 3 years, when after the 3rd year, it magically reappears. There's a companion bill for this, Senate Bill 549, which is in Senate Finance Committee this afternoon, 4:30 in Senate Room A, if you care to see it. And we've worked very hard with your local government liaisons, and we've pushed the committee members very hard on this issue, and we think that they're going to introduce a substitute bill because we base the argument that if this is so great for the Commonwealth, then it ought to be on the state's dime and not ours. And what this substitute will do is it will make it a competitive grant program subject to state appropriation. And that's the way it should be if this is a state policy that's so good for the Commonwealth. As I said, that will be before Senate Finance Committee and Senate Room A, and also in that committee this afternoon will be a transportation bill and VRS bills if you're interested. Now we get to our old friend VACo, HB 10. That's already passed the House. What this bill does, it will freeze the rates that you have in place currently. And for those of you towns that may think about having to increase the existing rates, you will not be able to do it. And if you are a county and you're thinking of switching over to VACo, well, you'll be able to impose VACo, but instead of being a gross receipts license tax, it would be a tax applied against the taxable income of the business. This is not really a reform initiative. What this really is, as plain as I can speak it, is an interim step towards eliminating VPOL altogether, which ordinarily I think VML would be happy to endorse both that and M&T if the General Assembly would finally give us a reliable, sustainable revenue source to make up for it. So you go across the street today, and you please remember the theme of do no harm. And take your business cards, and you're going to hear the other staffers speak about some of the specific budget amendments we have, and you can scribble on the back of that the item budget numbers that we want to support, and you go up to the 9th floor where House Appropriations is, and you go up to the 10th floor where the Senate Finance Committee is, and you leave your card so they know that you've been there and they know that you care about these issues. Do no harm. Thank you.
All right, I'm Mark Flynn with Ms. Lee, and here to talk to you about eminent domain, which is starts on page 4. And because you all didn't cheer for me, it may take me quite a while to finish my presentation. All right, well then I'm done. No, first of all, when you go to a ball game, of course, you want to know what's going, what inning you're in and all that stuff. So first of all, just where things are. There are the 2 resolutions to amend the Constitution on eminent domain. One, HJ3, is to be heard by the full House Privileges and Elections Committee in the morning. It probably won't be what you would call a hearing. It'll just be to report it out because the debate supposedly took place in the subcommittee, but that is happening in the morning. SJ3, which is the Senate version, of course, is on the Senate floor where it's been resting for almost a week now, I think. And the idea is that the Senate will not take up the 2 bills that it has to deal with on this, or maybe 3 bills, and the amendment. They'll do it all at one time. And the one bill that defines lost profits and lost access is going to the floor probably on Monday. So just, that's sort of, we're in the 7th inning, whatever. There is no stretch, however. And so the question is, then, what's this do to us? What's this do to the citizens of Virginia, really? It was interesting that the state's fiscal impact statement for the one bill that defines lost profits and lost access, and I don't probably need to do much background on what all that's about lost profits and lost access. If I do, we can talk about that in a bit at the end of the session. But the fiscal impact statement showed that the impact per year to VDOT alone for those 2 parts of the amendment alone, lost profits and lost access, would be $36 million a year. That's only a small fraction, really, of what the total impact will be. It was also interesting that the fiscal impact statement actually started out at $45 million at about noon, I think it was, and then by the time the subcommittee came up where it was presented, it got down to $36 million. I was looking to see if the person who had to deliver it had a broken arm or anything, but I'm sure there was no pressure on that. So for local governments and for the citizens that you all serve, one of the biggest issues will be that normally today you use the areas that you're going to extend water and sewer lines to, particularly for counties and for the cities that have open areas, green space, green fields, is you use the extension of water and sewer as a main way to control the growth and to decide when you're ready to build all the infrastructure to accommodate growth in an area. The way the constitutional amendment is written, the extension of a water and sewer line by your city, county, town, or water authority, if that water and sewer extension is to serve a new project, and a lot of times you'll do that. You'll know that you want to open up an area, but you wait for somebody to come along who's willing to pay for part of the cost of it, right? And then when that new prospect comes in, well, if that prospect, say, is a mixed use, it's going to have commercial, retail, and some residential in it, and it's a greenfield where there's really no revenue there now, then it is very likely that a court would rule, this lectern is driving me crazy, I don't know about you all, because it rocks, then a court is very likely to rule that that extension is for economic development or for increasing jobs or for increasing taxes. If the court rules that, then you lose the ability to use condemnation to acquire the easements or the land that you need to run those water and sewer lines. That means that the project doesn't happen. And there are a couple of bills that have been introduced to try to address that. But if the Constitution says you can't do something, you can't legislate around that constitutional prohibition. So that's, I think, for local governments, it's going to be one of the biggest impacts. You know, certainly the lost access and lost profits piece. What this lost profits, lost access piece says is that today, when you take property or you damage property, you have to pay just compensation for the value of the property taken and the damages to the resident. Well, the lost profits and lost access are two new additional pieces of what constitutes just compensation. So for a business, you would have to pay them the lost profits for that business when you temporarily close access so that they, you know, the McDonald's isn't selling hamburgers for a week when you have a water line break and you're working on that water line, or if you take some land in front of the McDonald's and you've limited its ability to have the same size of restaurant and all that, then you're going to have to pay lost profits there. So it's going to increase your costs in those kinds of cases where there are businesses that you are acquiring property from or where you're impacting their operation. Now, there's legislation that is going to the floor, as I mentioned, that is to define lost profits, lost access. That's what the constitutional amendment provides, is that the General Assembly shall define it. And it does help in the areas where you are actually condemning land. But in the situations where you're not condemning land, like the case that's going on today in Norfolk, where they were building a hotel, they had to do some temporary street closings to accommodate the safety of the traffic for that hotel, then this one antique store, the owner sued, saying, when you close the street over here, even though my property fronts over here, you owe me money. And the court says, yes, that's right. So that was clearly a public safety thing. They didn't take anything from this antique store. And so my point is that the Constitution and the way the courts interpret it already provide that when you're doing certain things that are what you would think of as street improvements, those things, that you can have to pay. Well, so then the question is, what do you have to pay? And that is just compensation. And the constitutional amendments provide that just compensation includes the lost profits and lost access. Now, you see the talking points on this up on page 5, that if this becomes law, Virginia's definition of lost profits and lost access would be more generous to businesses than any other state. There are a few other states, I think there are about 10 states that have some sort of lost profits, lost access kind of provision. However, each one of them is very, very limited. It would be much less limited here. And, you know, imagine if you have a and I hope nobody owns Blockbuster Video. If you do, you haven't suffered enough anyway, so whatever I have to say won't be a problem for you. But say you have a Blockbuster Video that is entitled to lost profits, and then you pay that Blockbuster Video the lost profits in a taking or in a damages case, and the next year the Blockbuster is going out of business anyway. You paid that owner for lost profits that he wasn't going to, weren't going to be there in the first place. So, you know, we have those kinds of issues. Again, for extending water and sewer lines, that's going to, and for roads in a lot of circumstances, that's going to really impact your operations and impact your citizens. And then the last thing is that, you know, constitutional amendments have to be passed 2 years in a row in identical form with an intervening election. That's different from any other act that the General Assembly does. And of course, there's a reason for that, and that is the Constitution is supposed to be the general rules to guide the Commonwealth. It's the Constitution is not supposed to be a statute. And it sets up the process where it takes 2 years so that if they do something rash the first year in order to get reelected, not that they, anyway, if they do something like that, then there's a second bite at the apple to get it right. And, you know, that's been in the Constitution for years and years. And so now is a shining example of why it is time to take a look at the language and get it right. VML's position is not that we shouldn't have a constitutional amendment at all. That's not where we are. We just think that it should be done correctly. And so that's a message, particularly speaking with senators, that helps. I will tell you that the battleground for this is in the Senate. The things are going to come out of the House. I mean, we know that. But in the Senate, we're working very hard. And so when you go this afternoon and tomorrow, when you talk with your delegation, certainly talk to your House members, but really focus on the members of the Senate of your delegation. You know, if this becomes law for a long, long time, local governments will be paying more to acquire less property. There is the representation that, like in the fiscal impact statement, the Attorney General said, this is not, the $36 million, he said, is not a new cost. It's just a question of who pays the cost. The taxpayers, everybody, or the citizens whose properties are taken. Well, we disagree with that analysis because this is a new cost, especially the lost profits, lost access is a new cost that it just hasn't existed in Virginia forever. It doesn't exist in other states. So it really is creating like super rights for businesses. And the last thing about it is that when you have to pay more for those businesses, and it's your money, who's going to have to make that up? The residents who pay their taxes for their homes. Somebody's going to have to make it up, and that's where it will come from. So anyway, glad I could bring good news to everybody.
Good afternoon, Joe Lurch, representing VML, and also my partner here, Larry Land. We cover transportation issues here at VML and VACo in the General Assembly. And if you go to page 5, and the heading House and Senate versions of the transportation bill moving forward, just a bit of an update, and then I'll go into the governor's introduced legislation and then where they are in the House and the Senate. We thought that these bills were actually going to be on the respective floors this week to begin voting on. They're actually still in the bodies of the separate committees. So it is a timely a day for you to be here. In fact, this afternoon in Senate Finance, they'll be taking up the Senate version. Well, let me just quickly talk about the governor's proposal. It relies heavily on general fund revenues for transportation. It increases the year-end surplus dedicated to transportation from 2/3 to 3/4. It takes the current share, 0.5% of the sales tax, increases that to 0.75% over an 8-year period, and dedicates that to transportation. And then the first 1% in state revenue growth, over 5% of each year, would also be dedicated to transportation. Those are all the general fund transfer proposals. The only new source of revenue comes from authorizing the CTB to set up naming rights for highways, bridges, and such, and charging a fee that would then go to highway maintenance. Now, I do want to talk about several of the provisions outside of revenue that I think local government should be concerned about. Key among them are provisions that would require local comprehensive plans to be consistent with the state's six-year plan, and then it would be up to the CTB to decide whether it's not, and the potential to withhold funds from local governments for the road projects. Another one that is not in here in the text, though, and it's in the original bill, is to have the CTB and the commissioner do a devolution study, taking back secondary roads. Now, the study that's spelled out in the legislation really only applies to Northern Virginia counties and to Chesterfield, but that's one of concern at that point. Let me first tell you where the House bill is, House Bill 1248. It was reported out of the Transportation Subcommittee by a 6-to-1 vote. We thought it was going to be reported out by the full Appropriations Committee yesterday afternoon, but actually they had some trepidation about the naming rights. They wanted more information, how much money would this actually generate, and what would be the process. So that will be before the full committee tomorrow. On the Senate side, it's a much different story. They introduced a substitute yesterday in Senate Finance. They're actually going to take it up again today at Senate Finance starting at 4:30, and it's a much different bill, what we see in the introduced substitute. It takes away all the provisions for rating the general fund, with the exception it does have that increase from 2/3 to 3/4 of the year in surplus. And it also takes away the naming rights fee. Instead, what it does is it starts to address an issue which you've probably seen a lot in the papers, which is indexing the gasoline tax for inflation. I think it was Senator Watkins was quoted in the paper today saying, this isn't actually fix the revenue for transportation, it's actually to stop the bleeding. Because we've been losing hundreds of millions of dollars since the gasoline tax was first set at 17.5 cents per gallon more than 25 years ago. So it does all those things. It takes out the harmful provisions requiring local comprehensive plans to be part of that. It also, it doesn't have anything requiring devolution, but what it does is provides an opportunity for counties that want to take over secondary roads to use the meals tax as a way to help pay for transportation. Now, the one thing I forgot to mention on the Transportation Subcommittee, when they reported out the bill, they took out the devolution language, but we expect that to be a budget amendment in some form or another coming out from the House. What I would say is just conclude by saying, the governor was here a year ago, and he was very successful in passing omnibus transportation legislation that relied heavily on bonding for moving forward. He had made the pledge several times throughout the year that he wanted to fix the transportation funding issue. Well, none of this really does that. I mean, we have close to $65 billion of identified capital needs in the long-range plan going out to 2035, and this doesn't get us anywhere close to doing that. What I would say is that these are going to be radically different bills as they cross over, and it's likely headed to conference. So it's your chance and your opportunity to let both the House and the Senate members know what's before them against the local governments. The last thing I want to say, Larry had done a chart which we're going to have available for you in the back there, and it's a comparison. It's a 2-page comparison of kind of the key components of all 3 versions: the introduced version, what is currently the House version, and currently the Senate version. What I would say is these are likely to change, especially the House and the Senate versions, between now and when they get approved by the separate jurisdiction or separate houses. Larry, do you want to have anything to add to that?
Thank you very much. I think Joe did a fantastic job of summarizing a very, very difficult piece of legislation, especially when you're considering that right now there are 3 proposals. So if 1 hour from now, if anything that Joe and I have set up here are not true, it's not our fault. It's a moving target, it really is. So we're going to try to monitor this as closely as we can. As Joe said, we do have the chart with 3 columns, which looks like this. This is about as good of a job as we could do in the time frame we've had to really summarize the differences in the approaches that are taken with respect to transportation this year. I think it's going to be a real challenge. The only other thing that I will convey to you is that I've listened to the debate. It's been very interesting because, especially in the Senate side, you have heard more and more talk about this whole idea of indexing the fuels tax, not so much to the consumer price index, but to the cost of materials that are commonly used in transportation. And you think of things like asphalt, like concrete, like steel, and those kinds of commodities. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. The VACo position has always been to support sources for transportation revenue that are separate, distinct, reliable, and stable. we have been in opposition to any further transfers of revenues from the general fund for transportation. And I think that's about all I have to say on that. And thank you very much. We'll be glad to answer any questions later on in the day. Thank you.
Before Mary Jo comes up here, and while I've got the pulpit, I want to take you to 2 quick corrections within the program. If you'll go to page 11, and this is just how things change up here. And this is under support state funding for local governments for Chesapeake Bay cleanup. Wanted to let you know in the last paragraph there, House Bill 1180 will be heard in the House Appropriations Capital Outlay Subcommittee, which it was, and it will likely be before the full committee on February 10th. It actually, the subcommittee recommended laying the bill on the table. It was defeated, and the full committee took it up there afterwards, and it was defeated. So you need to know that. But it still lives on the Senate side, and that's good news. The next correction I want to take you to is a minor one is on the following page. Under stormwater bill, creates unfunded mandates for certain localities. The last paragraph before the talking points, it gives me a list of affected localities that this would include. What I would say is take off Matthews County. If this legislation doesn't affect them, and add Tazewell County to that list. And further ado, here's Mary Jo.
I'm Mary Jo Fields, and I work with VML. I cover retirement issues and education funding, some other stuff. But first, I want to mention, I think Mark meant to tell you that on page 13, there's a bill about Bill grants churches absolute right to run daycare centers. That bill was tabled this morning, so just exit, and you don't need to speak to your legislators about it. Is that right, Mark? Yes, Ted and Mark said it's right. So anyway, that also counts as a win, so that's a very good thing. Yeah, we need those wins, believe me. All right, if you would turn back to page 6. Retirement's a big issue. I think ever since the VRS board came out with its new certified retirement rates, and people saw how much money it was going to cost to try to get retirement systems on some kind of reasonable funding level, it's been a big topic. There's really three things that are under consideration. For local governments, we have the big topic of Line of Duty Act funding. And if you remember, in 2009, I think it was the first year, maybe it was 10, the state decided that it didn't want to pay the cost of benefits for public safety officers, even though they're the ones that put those benefits in place. And then instead, you would get to pay those costs. It's very expensive. The changes were done in the budget conference and kind of at the last minute and without really thinking through how it would work. Both VML and VACo's insurance programs have come up with a group approach to funding these benefits. And in doing so, they've encountered a number of administrative type issues and have had legislation introduced to address those administrative issues and just make it more efficient. Unfortunately, the firefighters and public safety people still don't like even a move toward efficiency and have managed to get a reenactment clause put on the bills. Well, a reenactment clause put on the Senate bill. The House bill has never been heard. Anyway, so if you look on page 6 and 7, we'd like to see the reenactment clause come off of the Senate bill, which is Senate Bill 125. It's already passed the Senate and it's in the House. And we would like to see the House bill go forward. We're hearing that it may not, but that it may just show up later on in the budget. Who knows? It's really hard to tell with a lot of these things about, what's going to happen when. A good example being all the bills that deal with retirement. I'm going to concentrate on 4 bills. There's 2 bills by Senator Watkins, which are, let me see, Senate Bill 497, Senate Bill 498, and then there's two bills by the Speaker and Chris Jones, which are House Bill 1129 and House Bill 30. This morning, a Senate subcommittee took up Senate Bill 497, and I've summarized the bill. We've summarized the bills on page 7, and then if you look on page 8 and 9, we tried to do a little chart that kind of puts it in bullet form. And it may be just as easy if we look at the chart. I'm going to make you go back and forth just to keep you awake here. So we're on page 9 under Senate Bill 497, Watkins. Both VML and I have had a position of feeling that local government should have the authority to require their Plan 1 employees, and those are those who were hired before July 1, 2010, to pay the required 5% member contribution at the option of the employer. We both had a position that didn't want the state to tell us to do that. As originally introduced, Senate Bill 497 said that all local employees as of this July have to pay that 5% member contribution, both for the Plan 1 and any Plan 2 going forward. And it phased it in for school boards, but it was mandatory. There was no salary increase attached to it. The Senate subcommittee this morning, we think, from best we could understand, we didn't get to see the actual bill, made some amendments to that to put on the salary increase. We think that it's still got the different schedule for local employees and school employees. So from our perspective, we didn't like that it wasn't local option, and now it's gotten worse because it's not local option. School employees are treated differently from local employees, and there's a salary increase. So at some point, the General Assembly really needs to decide, are they local employees or are they our employees, and we'll tell you what to do with them. So anyway, that bill, Senate Bill 497, is going to be before the Senate Finance Committee this afternoon at 4:30. I also say that I know that there are we do have localities that would be willing to accept that mandate because they are so anxious to address the Plan 1 member contribution issue. So it is an issue that, you know, different localities have differing positions on. The next bill I'll talk about is Senate Bill 498 on page 9, and I'm going to discuss it in conjunction with House Bill 1130, which is on page 8. Both of these bills set up what's called a hybrid retirement plan. So right now you have your Plan 1 employees who were hired before July 1, 2010, and then you got your Plan 2 who have kind of different retirement benefits. You can make them pay their 5%. You know, so this would in effect create Plan 3. That would be, next year we'll have Plan 4, and then we'll have Plan 5, and God only knows how many. But these hybrid plan would be a combination of a defined benefit, which is the traditional VRS plan, and a defined contribution, which is the plan that's become more prevalent in the private sector, the 401k or 201k or 101k, however you want to look at it, and the 457. So both House Bill 1130 and Senate Bill 498 would create kind of a defined benefit light. It would replace about 30% of your income when you retire. It would be combined with a defined contribution that would have a required employee contribution and employer contribution. The bills differ, and there's specifics of, you know, how much is required of the employer, how much is required of the employee, but they are alike in that they're both hybrid plans. When JLR did a study of employee compensation earlier, well, at the end of this last year in December, this was one of the policy options that JLR presented. I think the bills have some momentum just because there's kind of the JLR blessing sort of on them. But employee groups are not enthusiastic in general about House Bill 1130, Senate Bill 498. I think they're particularly not happy with Senate Bill 498. employers, what we'd like to see from the viewpoint of local governments is that there's a fiscal impact statement that shows that these hybrid plans save the state money, but they haven't done the fiscal impact for localities just because it's expensive to do. You have to do, these actuarial analysis and so forth. So we'd kind of like to see that, to see if it really makes a big difference in Lynchburg, say, or, how's it going to affect a specific local government. So we have some reservations and questions that haven't been addressed on that. The other bill is House Bill 1129, and now I'm back on page 8 again. This is basically another Plan 3 type of employee. This is the governor's recommendations on reforming VRS. And what it does is takes benefits down a little bit more, and it also requires state employees, but not local employees, to contribute 6% of their pay instead of 5% to retirement. And frankly, I'm not much of a prognosticator. I don't know how to know what's going to happen, and I don't know that I have the best political feel. I sure have no idea what's going to happen in retirement. It is just up in the air. So anyway, you can, I hope the chart will help. Remember this afternoon, Senate Finance, take up the 2 Watkins bills. House Appropriations Subcommittee at, I think it's at 3:30, takes up the House bill. So if you're interested in retirement, today is the day to be in Richmond. Couldn't be more exciting. All right, so I am going to move now to budget amendments, and I'm going to cover just a few of the budget amendments, and then either Bo and Janet are going to speak to the rest of them. I am now turning to page 10. Neil mentioned, several areas of concern that we had with the budget as introduced, and items that we would like to see some funding for, and I'm going to speak to the first couple of those right now. First, VML and VACo got together and got a great group of senators and delegates to put in budget amendments for us. And I have to say that I think we worked together more as a team this year. We really got some good patrons for our budget amendments, and I think it was pretty effective. We can hope that we'll get something out of it. For one thing, we got Delegate Jones and Senator Hanger to put in a budget amendment allowing us to charge our Plan 1 employees at 5%. And if you were looking at the chart, let's see, where is that? It's in the middle of the page. Allows localities to require Plan 1 employees to pay the 5% member contribution. Delegate Jones, Senator Hanger, and there's the item numbers. Neil mentioned about the business cards. A good way to use the business cards is if you support one of these budget amendments, write on the back of the card the item number. So, for instance, if you like local employees to require Plan 1 employees to pay the 5% member contributions, on the back of your card for the House Appropriations Committee, write item 468, number 3H, support, and go upstairs and put it at the desk of the House Appropriations Committee staff. If you like the Senate, or you could do it for the Senate version, which you'll notice is item 468, number 1S. So that's an easy way to use your business card to get across a quick message. I am running out of I'm losing my voice here. Just a couple of other education amendments. We asked that money be restored for the introduced budget had 2 policy changes on re-benchmarking or updating the cost of education funding. I actually had 4, but we chose to address 2 of them. We asked that both of those be reversed. Those are the very first 2 items. The first is to restore the use of an inflation factor for non-personal support costs. And I know if I were you and I'm thinking, what is a non-personal support cost? Because those are just like 4 words that don't mean anything. A non-personal support cost are utilities, gasoline, insurance, including health insurance premiums. And so the way the budget is done, the way the state is basing its cost on what prevailing costs were in 2010 for gasoline, utilities, and insurance. And your school boards, unfortunately, have to pay their bills based on FY13, FY14. There's a big difference. It's completely ridiculous that the state would not recognize inflation in the price of something like gasoline. So, item 139, number 18H, item 139, number 1S, those are excellent ones for you to support. The other is convoluted, has to do with federal stimulus funds, and the way the introduced budget was, the way the introduced budget treats the federal stimulus funds is the end result is a permanent decrease in the amount of state support for education. We'd like to see that reversed as well. And those are the next two items. And I am through. Thank you.
Okay, real quick. Also on page 10, there's an item that references 599 funding. And 599 funding is state assistance to local law enforcement. So if you are one of the 39 cities, 126 towns, or 9 counties that has a police department, you would be very interested in this item. We've gotten budget amendments in both the House and the Senate side to give us a little bump up in the funding for that. The governor level funded this program in his introduced budget. We're asking for what would be the equivalent of a 3.3% increase in the next fiscal year. And that goes along with what the state's general fund revenues are expected to grow by. And I know a lot of people in this room would be are real envious of a 3.3% revenue increase. Anyway, so those budget amendments are in the House and the Senate, and it's been really quiet this year. Not many people have been talking to their members about this, and it's really, 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 really important to talk to members while you're here that you support an increase in the 599 funding for police departments, because if they don't hear from you, they won't put it in the budget, and there's nothing that we can do about it then. We just won't get that increase. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about, and I'm going to turn it over to Bo Levingtown to talk to you a few more, and we're it for the last of the staff, so hang in there. No,
Thanks, Janet. I'm Bo Blevins with the Virginia Association of Counties, and since you all cheered me, I'll go really quickly. If you go to the bottom of page 10, I'm going to talk about a Senate budget amendment that's carried by Senator Hanger and Senator Colgan. The item numbers are item 283. You can see there's 3 of them there. Again, like Neil Mink said, put that on the back of your business card, go by and visit them, put it at the front desk, get out there, and also if you see Senator Hanger or Colgan, thank them for carrying this. What this budget amendment does is it restores special education wraparound services for comprehensive services, it restores funding for comprehensive services. And what had happened in the governor's introduced budget is that he moved those services from mandated to non-mandated. This reverses that. So switch over to page 11.
Is that for all of them?
All three of them, yeah. They're all 3 do the same thing. There's just some different wording, and so what happened, they just ended up putting all 3 in, and at some point, I'm sure they'll sort out which one they want to use. Number 2, at the top of page 11, there is a budget amendment carried again by Senator Hanger, item 283, number 8S. It adds training funding for comprehensive services training, and it has language directing that funding to do so. That's $50,000 for fiscal year 13, $50,000 for fiscal year 14. For the biennium, that's $100,000. Go by and support.